Besides a loud gear whine, how can I tell if I have a bad deck spindle bearing or which spindle is involved? Observe. This is good, while this is not. If you have access to the deck bottom, this condition can be confirmed on a more obvious scale while wearing your gloves and grasping the blade. This needs a fix. So let's get after it. When ordering your new bearings, you will need certain measurements that may be secured using analog or digital calipers like these. Absent all other means, you may have to remove one of the bad bearings intact and measure it this way so you can order the correct set for your deck. You will need 2 bearings per spindle. I will include a link to the bearings that match my measurements, as this size is pretty common. You can order bearings like this off eBay or from your lawnmower dealership. These bearings are sealed, which is good, as these deck spindles do not have grease fittings. Begin by releasing pressure on the idler pulley and removing the deck belt. Since fastener size will vary, I will not post the size of the sockets used in this demonstration. The pulley nut on top of the bad spindle will need to be loosened while the blade is still mounted. Wearing safety glasses and gloves, carefully use an object like this 2x4 to block movement of the blade in a clockwise fashion. On the top of the deck, apply a socket to the pulley nut and break loose the tension counterclockwise, but do not fully remove the nut yet. Next, remove the blade on the bad spindle by blocking with the 2x4 and turning the blade nut counterclockwise. Carefully remove the blade and set it aside. Back on the top of the deck, finish removing the pulley nut and pulley. Slide the spindle shaft out the bottom of the deck. I chose to use a round punch for this next step. Whatever you use needs to be long and narrow enough to go through the spindle shaft opening from one end to the other. I start by entering through the top of the deck, resting my punch on the inner rim of the bottom bearing and tapping all the way around until it can be removed. This deck contains a spacer between the top and bottom bearings that I'm just going to remove and clean for now. Using my chisel, I can now enter the spindle shaft through the bottom and begin to tap on the rim of the top bearing. Unfortunately, the top bearing is in pretty bad shape and frozen in place and begins to fall apart. I placed a protective tarp on my driveway because I'm going to spray penetrating oil to aid in removal of this stuck bearing. Check this out after only 10 minutes. 2 taps. With this top bearing removed, note the position of this inner rim stop. The new bearing will fit flush with the top edge of the spindle. Insert the new bearing on the top side by gently tapping the mid to outer edge all the way around. You can tell when a bearing is seated properly when the sound of the metal tapping changes. Just listen. On the bottom, I reinserted the freshly cleaned spacer and let it float in the middle of the grease in the shaft opening. If you need to add grease, you can do it now. Here, witness that the bearing rim is seated further back inside the shaft opening. Set the new bearing in position and tap it into place. Reinsert the spindle shaft from the bottom up, noting that the shaft collar fits flush against the spindle bottom. Back on top, when the spindle shaft is reinserted, remount the pulley onto the spindle shaft splines and reattach the pulley nut, but do not tighten. Remount the blade and nut. Block the blade movement and tighten the blade nut clockwise, being careful of sharp edges. Move the block to the opposite side of the blade, then reach around to the top and tighten the pulley nut. Apply tension to the idler pulley and reattach the deck belt. And this job is complete.